Okay, so just to finish this one off, this is going to be fairly straightforward, I think. In fact, this would be extremely easy to animate. All we needed to do would be go up here to bend. We could bend our original curve, which would then bend all our curves. And then if we come to our end to view that, and we in fact animate this bend here, you can see we've got this, which is fine, except you can see that when we get to these smaller, also this increased bend at this point, our poly extrude is actually freaking out a bit here and going a bit crazy. So we're getting a bit of sort of jitteriness there. So this does actually happen sometimes with poly extrude. If you're putting geometry in that's being pretty warped or deformed, it can go a bit haywire almost. The other issue as well is back here where we extruded our, let's just check that, these guys, because we've extruded this in global space and we've moved it upwards, as we're adjusting our bend, these are kind of being squished and pushed inside our geometry. Had we just done it based on our normal, this actually wouldn't be so much of a problem, but I think we'd still have the problem with our normals kind of going a bit crazy down here. But never mind, there's still another option we can use. We can use point deform to essentially fix this. I'm just going to set this back to where we were. I think it was, step back a few more steps. That was it, about 37.4 I think was our start for this. So if we were to come down to our sweep here, we've got geometry at this point, which is actually pretty clean. If we were to animate this, we could use this to deform our high-res geometry. And this is exactly what point deform is going to do for us. It's kind of like a mesh deformer in a way. So let's just take a copy of our geometry into this point, and I'm just going to right click here, just choose actions and create reference copy. This is going to duplicate our node setup, but it's going to create references back to our node parameters over here. So anything we change here will be applied here. So if we do need to change anything, it will update. Let's say we are going to do a point deform. Let's do our point deform at this point before we've smoothed the final result, because I think if we do it here, it's going to deform things a bit and this will kind of smooth everything out at the end. So let's just drag down our smooth. Let's connect our geometry at the end of our mesh here into our first port, which is our mesh to deform. Now we need a rest point lattice, and this is essentially a copy of the mesh to use to do the deformation. But this isn't going to move at all, so we can just use this because it's not animated here. So we'll take this and we'll drag this into our rest point lattice. Now over here, we're going to animate our mesh. But of course, because these are all referenced, if we change our bend angle here, it's going to change it on our original as well, which won't work. So we're just going to make sure we disconnect this by right clicking here and just doing delete channels. So everything else is still going to sync up to our other set of nodes here, but we can now freely adjust our bend without changing anything over here. So with this done, we've now got the ability to just bend this shape like so. And if we connect this output here into our third input, which is our deformed point lattice, and view the result of this, we can now animate this one to deform our high res. Now you can see this looks a little bit nuts because we're using a very low res mesh to deform a very high res, but we can come here to our point deform. We can just increase our minimum points, so it's kind of using more points to approximate our difference. And we can just increase the radius a little bit like so, just to find like a nice in between that kind of works. We don't have to be too clean here because remember we're going to now feed this into our smooth, which is going to smooth things out even further. So just to reiterate, this is kind of essentially we've got our rest point lattice here. We're animating a version of this over here, And Houdini's going to use point deform to calculate the difference between these two meshes and apply that as a deformation to our high-res mesh. So as I say, it's pretty much just a mesh deformer. Okay, so let's animate this now. If I come up to the bend here, I'm going to come back to frame 1. Let's set our bend angle to come all the way down here. And I think maybe about 250 will work. Going to alt click to set a keyframe there. Let's come to maybe about frame 100. And I'm going to set that back to what it was originally. Let's just double check again. 37.45, all near enough. So frame 100, 37.45, and set a keyframe there. Let's just shift click on that as well to open up our animation editor. I'm just going to bring out our handle here just to give it a really long sort of ease into that. So as it animates up, kind of unrolls like this. Nice. So coming down, let's see, after our smooth, one thing I haven't done yet with these plants, which I do want to start thinking about, I'll probably go back and do this to the other plants, is thinking about using attributes that we can maybe use as masks for shading. Now I'd quite like to have maybe a gradient that runs from the middle of our, inside of our plant here to the edge, and we can use this to sort of colorize our plant later on. So I'm going to create a point attribute that goes from the center out to the edge, and we're going to output that into our final plant. So to do this, I'm going to use a distance along geometry, which is a great node because it allows you to calculate essentially either a distance attribute or a mask based on the neighbors, your neighboring points, in fact. So essentially it will go around your mesh measuring distance. If you had a point here, it would see the point on the back, not as sort of the distance between the two, but it will actually measure the distance all the way around the mesh, around the other side to it. So it's kind of like connectivity by distance, or distance by connectivity really. So if we come to this, I'm going to output a mask. I'm going to set my start point. I think I'm going to go for something right in the middle here. It's going to go 1 point. And in fact, if we now were to control middle mouse click and just click on our mask. In fact, before we do that, let's just rename this something else. Let's call it inner mask, so it's a bit more obvious. Control middle mouse click and then click on inner mask. And if we come to our visualizers, we should have that one there now, which we can turn on. And you can see we have this essentially like a gradient between 0 and 1 going from the middle to the edge. And it's not included on the back really because we are measuring this by connectivity. So we can increase the radius, and we could also drag this in to sort of refine this. I think I just want it to kind of be in the middle and then fade off towards the edges like this. But we can use this within our redshift shader later to essentially colorize our plant. So I'm going to leave this on our mesh as an attribute. Okay, so next, one thing I haven't done throughout this lesson is, of course, we are facing our plant along our minus x axis, and we need it to be facing in Z. So let's put down a transform here. It's going to control and rotate this to incrementally snap it to 45 degrees. And then I'm just going to move it down just a little bit so it's lined up a bit more, something like that, because this of course will be the angle that it's lined up along our normal. And I think also, as well as that, as before, I'm going to scale this up from 0. I'm also going to move this. Let me just, adjust this a bit further. I want this to sit on kind of like the origin here. So as this is where it will be placed on our geometry based on our point. So we don't want it too far above or below, but just right about there, I think we'll do it. Okay, so yeah, let's also scale this one up over its sort of unfolding so it comes up from nothing, as I've done before. Again, let's put another transform. And I'm just going to scale this up over maybe about 75 frames to be 1 there, 0 at the start. And again, I'm just going to adjust these keyframes so it's got a nice long ease in. Let's see how that looks. We're not playing it real time, but I think that has got a nice feel to it. Okay, so last step, let's just perhaps clean off this group, and maybe we're going to get rid of our curve view. We're going to keep our inner mask that we've just created. So let's just do a bit of tidying up of attributes. So attrib delete. Let's delete our curve view. Put down group delete. This was for our edge that we used to drag out our edge of our shell thing here. So I'm going to not use group delete. Just going to delete that edge group. Let's put down a null. Plant D even, out. And there we go.